Like the entire lineup of Creedmoor cartridges, H4350 has risen to extreme popularity in the last 10 years, and that's the subject of this video. Gavin Gee here from UltimateReloader.com. I'm back with Guy Miner. Thank you for joining us, Guy.
Glad to be here, Gavin.
We are here to talk about one of our favorite powders, our favorite smokeless powders, Hodgdon's H4350, which is a part of their extreme lineup of powders.
It's good stuff.
Yes. Like Varget, which is another powder I use on a very, very frequent basis, which is also a part of this extreme lineup of powders, those powders are formulated to be temperature insensitive. So over a wide variety of temperatures that you're going to be shooting in, whether it be hunting or going to a match, whatever it is that you're doing, you're going to see minimal variations in pressure and velocity, and that is handy.
It is, and thanks for mentioning the hunting. That's how I use it mostly, is in my hunting rifles, and it's worked out great for quite a few years.
So this is an extruded powder, not unlike Varget. In fact, if you look at them side by side, they look pretty similar. It is available in 1 pound containers or 8 pound containers. I'm very privileged here to be one of these people that has 16 plus pounds of this stuff on hand. And that is important because we're shooting cartridges that use H4350 on a very, very frequent basis.
Yes, yes. I mean, we're going through it, but we have some.
Right. Yep. So let's talk about burn rate. This is kind of a good place to start. If we look at the sort of Creedmoor class of powders, the H4350 falls pretty much square in the middle of that range. So if you have a bullet that represents the middle of the bullet weight range, like 140 for instance, in a 6.5 Creedmoor, it's going to be an ideal result. And when we're thinking about an ideal result, what are some of the things you're thinking about, Guy?
I think not only do we want a good, solid, high velocity, but high velocity helps, but consistency. I want that shot-to-shot consistency, that low SD number. That's what I want. And whether I'm sighting in the summertime or hunting in November, you know, it all helps. And of course, match shooters, they're shooting much of the year.
Yes.
Cold and hot.
Very true.
So, yeah.
And that consistent velocity, you could think of it as your extreme spread, which is the outer limits of the total variation, right, of your velocity, or you could think of it in terms of the standard deviation of your velocity, which is going to kind of root out some of the very extreme ends of the data spectrum, if you want to think of it that way. Those two measures of velocity are going to be super critical when you're reaching out to 1,000 yards or even beyond, right? Because your vertical dispersion will proportionally grow along with that extreme spread and standard deviation of the velocity. And I think that's why, you know, the Creedmoor class of cartridges is a great sort of example of how this powder is great because of how consistent it is. I've had SDs down into with the 25 Creedmoor load development I did at 3 feet per second.
Wow.
For 5 shots in that range. And that's when you know that you're really, wow, I'm on a great velocity node here and this is looking really, really good. We have looked at some of the other powders that are in this range, including Vihtavuori N555. We did a tested story on Sta-Ball 6.5, which is a really interesting powder. It is one of the few powders that is formulated for temperature insensitivity. It's a little bit of a difficult thing to achieve with a flattened ball powder as opposed to an extruded stick powder. It meters really well.
Yes, that's a nice advantage for a spherical or sphere-like powder.
Yes, but it's a little bit slower, and so it's favored perhaps for bullets that are heavier in the weight range. If you're thinking about something like 6.5 Creedmoor, that could be like a 156,
Maybe.
Something like that. But speaking of burn rate, let's talk about some of the cartridges that we've both used here. This is a table that Guy put together. I added one cartridge here, my favorite hunting load for 6.5 Creedmoor with the 143 ELDX. This is quite a diverse list of different applications.
It is. When I was taking a look at 4350 and I started realizing how many different cartridges I have loaded over the years and what a wide range with H4350. It surprised me a little bit, all the way from down from the little 6mm Creedmoor, 6mm Remington, up to my 375 H&H.
Yeah.
And they all thrive on it.
Right.
So it's nice.
Yeah, with 30-06 in there. If you take that for like your traditional big game hunter, and then you take your Creedmoor Classic cartridges all the way to a 30-06, which is maybe a more traditional big game hunting type of application, and then up a little bit further to a 300 grain 375 H&H for your Ruger No. 1 falling block.
Right.
That's quite a spectrum of different applications and bullet weights.
It is. It's surprising. We're all the way down into the upper 30s for your 6.5 Creedmoor load, all the way up to 75 grains of gunpowder, H4350 in the 375 H&H, and that's not quite a top level load. It's getting there. It's a good solid load.
And not even on this list is that 25 Creedmoor that I mentioned as well, which falls, of course, between the 6 and the 6.5. So question for you all, if you have a favorite cartridge or favorite load that you load with H4350, drop a comment. We'd like to hear what you're running with this powder. Okay, another test that I like to take a look at, and this is actually from one of our prior stories, is to compare density, right? And that is important if you're looking at case capacity and if you're near max case capacity. Interesting thing, I was talking to Brian Litz about load development and some other people in the industry as well. It is a good thing to be near max case capacity. You know, when you've accounted for the bullet seated to a particular depth, if you're out of airspace in there and you're full of powder, that can lead to more consistency, especially when you account for hunting cartridges where, you know, you're aiming down, you're aiming up, and you might, if there's air, you're going to have a gap for that flame to propagate through before it hits the powder. That can decrease and increase velocity very slightly.
And I think we've both noticed that on some of our load development, when you fill up much of that case with your powder, things get tighter. You get that tighter ES, tighter SD, and it's like your cartridge is working the way it's supposed to. And I like that.
Yeah, definitely. So of the powders that we tested in that story, it's interesting that H4350 is kind of in the middle, but densities were very similar with N555 at 1010 grams per liter, Varget at 1010, basically identical, H4350 at 1060, and Stayball 6.5 at 1130, which it makes sense that the Stayball is a little bit more dense because the granules are a lot smaller and can, I guess, pack a bit tighter if you want to think of it that way.
I've got to borrow some of your Stayball. Well, just take it and try it in some of my cartridges. I've never worked with it.
Well, again, it's slower and, you know, it's a little bit denser, so that gives you some versatility with certain applications. And this is informal testing. Just know that the way the powder falls out of the measure will affect how it packs. Hence the drop tube funnels, you know, for getting max, you know, density out of that powder. But this does give you kind of a rough idea of kind of the relative densities. Then we've taken a look also under the microscope. This is interesting. I have a 400 power Wi-Fi microscope we're using for this footage that you're seeing right now. And we're able to compare granules essentially side by side. So if you look at the bottom image here on the left, we have Stayball 6.5, which is flattened ball powder. You can see that very clearly. It looks like blood platelets, you know, or small discs, basically. H4350 is in the middle here, which has an appearance, again, very similar to Varget when you look at it under the microscope. Very precise cylindrical granules.
Yes, yeah, that 4350 is right there in the middle of them. That looks good.
And if you're working with a scale, a precise lab scale like the A&D FX120i, Cambridge Environmental sells those, you're going to see a similar weight compared to Hodgdon as well, which is about 0.02 of a grain per granule. So if you've got to come up 0.04, you throw a couple onto the scale, and boom, it predictably comes right up. Interestingly, N555, which has a similar density, has smaller granules, and they're actually quite a bit darker in appearance as well. Yeah. So things that aren't necessarily, you know, super obvious to the naked eye when you put it under the microscope, it all becomes clear. And those tick marks that you see on the scale, though, those are 1/64th of an inch. So N555, which you can very clearly see in the picture is the shortest, has about 43 thousandths of an inch length for the cylindrical granule. H4350 came in at 0.0547, so 54.7 thousandths of an inch, and Sta-Ball 65 about 31.3 thousandths of an inch in diameter. Of course, the thickness is quite a bit smaller than that since it's flattened. But different granules, different properties, very similar burn rate.
Interesting.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, H4350 is a standard, right? It is the standard for the Creedmoor class of cartridge by which all other powders are compared. Performance, burn rate, velocity, it does set the standard, and there's a lot of great options out there with, a lot of other factors to consider, like the metering aspects and
True.
subtle variations in the burn rate.
And the metering is better than it used to be back in the old days. This was a longer cut powder. Now it's not. It's shorter cut, and it meters much better now. I'm not usually loading up 500 pieces of brass. I can do this for 20 or 100. And if I need to use a trickler or if I'm using one of the electronic scales, it does just fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it does do better than some of the other longer,
Yep.
the ones with the longer kernels of powder.
Yeah, definitely. One thing we didn't mention so far is accuracy, and I can say, I know during the 25 Creedmoor load workup, I had 3-shot groups going into 0.050 inches approximately.
Wow.
And have seen similar, really spectacular results with, the 6.5 Creedmoor and the 6 Creedmoor for that matter.
I was just going to say I was happy when I got down around a ½ inch with my 6 Creed, but oh well.
Well, I've seen you shoot an Ultimate Reloader custom rifle recently, and if I remember correctly, you were in the ones.
It did pretty well.
Off of a bipod?
Yes. I was impressed.
That is super good. Anything you want to try next with H4350 that comes to mind?
H4350 and try next. More loads with my 30-06, honestly.
Nice.
Maybe some heavier bullets.
Yeah.
Probably normally look at an H4831, something a little bit slower for those heavier bullet loads. But I like messing around and seeing what it'll do.
Yeah.
180, 200, maybe 220 grain bullets. We'll see.
Super good stuff. Yeah, I think I'm going to look at 6mm Creedmoor a bit more with some of the different bullets that we're looking at testing, A-tips and some of the different burger bullets, lots of things to take a look at. But a very popular cartridge for PRS competitors because of the recoil, and you've shown your 6mm Creed loads here, so maybe we can compare some notes.
There you go. Why not?
Yeah, and speaking of comparing notes, again, if you're loading something very specific with H4350, please drop a comment and tell us what you're loading. Let's start a discussion. Also, if you have something else that you want to try next with H4350, maybe you just want to get H4350, period. Drop a comment and we'll start a discussion. Thank you, Guy, for sharing all of your loads and being part of this story.
Thank you.
Awesome. That concludes this story, and that means it's time to wrap it up. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. Also, make your voice heard. If you have something to say, please drop a comment. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications because you're not going to want to miss the awesome content that is coming up. And finally, flex your reloading pride. You could look great in one of these t-shirts. We've got multiple designs at the Ultimate Reloader store. I'll see you later because I'm off to go shooting.